Team Mercedes are having a terrible season. FIA announced they will introduce new measures to control porpoising from next season. Will the new measures aid an out-of-competition Mercedes? Keep watching, and you will get the answer to that. The 2022 Formula One season is a season to forget for Mercedes. Early errors created setbacks for its racers. While it seems like they are clawing back by getting a few podium finishes, they are a long way from clinching the World Championship title. While Lewis Hamilton was back on the podium at the Austria Grand Prix, Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff admits he was not fast enough to attack right at the front. We're still missing 2 or 3 tenths in terms of performance, he told Sky Deutschland. So, what are the new measures and what does it intend to solve? The FIA is looking at making a series of adjustments to the technical regulations for 2023 in a bid to combat porpoising. The term porpoising is a phenomenon affecting Formula One cars, causing them to bounce up and down due to ground effect aerodynamics. Following the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, the FIA decided to intervene in an attempt to protest drivers from the effect of severe vertical oscillations. The silver arrows have been one of the most affected by porpoising this season, with Hamilton complaining of back pains at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. The 7-time world champion was suffering more than ever this season from the bouncing of his car. Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff even let it be known that he was worried about the driver's health. At the end of the race, Hamilton even had to be helped out of his car. Horner called it just posturing, but the FIA now seems sensitive to the criticism of Mercedes. George Russell, Daniel Ricciardo, and several other drivers noted back pain at the end of that race, while Pierre Gasly revealed he was fighting through the weekend thanks to painkillers. There are 4 areas where changes are being made for next year, all related to the underfloor and designed to limit how hard the teams are trying to work ground effect to generate downforce and make the underfloors more consistent. The new changes will mean teams must raise the floor edges of their cars by at least 25 millimeters for next season. In the first part of the season, Mercedes pursued the higher downforce route. This led to all of the talk about how strong the car would be if it could be run at the designed and desired ride height, but it couldn't. Mercedes showed for many races that it wasn't willing to compromise and felt it was better to complain about the problem rather than be seen simply being slower. Red Bull and Ferrari had tunnels in the rear of the floor that served to reduce the light switch effect that you would get from the theoretically higher downforce flat foot area on the floor. According to Charles Anderson, it is no coincidence that when Mercedes started to run the car just that little bit higher and worked the front corner of the floor harder, leaving less sealing work for the last section of the floor foot to do. It went in the correct direction. Mercedes was able to generate the downforce from the underfloor differently, and its porpoising problem started to get under more control. The FIA has yet to say how this 25mm rise will be applied, in particular, whether it will be applied to the floor edge at the rear or the full length of the floor. But what matters is that the rear part of the floor is regulated. Manufacturers will also have to raise the underfloor diffuser and will be subject to more straightened lateral floor deflection tests. The throat is not the opening at the front, where we see the vertical veins. It is the lowest part of the aerodynamic profile that makes up the underfloor venturi. It is a bit like the lower surface of a wing section. Again, the lower to the ground it is, the more downforce it can produce, but the more critical it becomes to the gap to the ground changing, i.e. as ride height lowers. Charles Anderson, while explaining the diffuser throat, wrote, "I don't think it will be a major fix to the current problems, as the throat is currently relatively high anyway. As for the introduction of more stringent lateral floor deflection tests, unfortunately, we have to be skeptical about this. While it sounds like a logical move, and there should be some control on that level of lateral stiffness, we can't see any evidence that it is being used to improve performance. we wouldn't get too excited about this achieving anything. You shouldn't too. Lateral deflection would only be a problem if the front splitters or the rear diffuser vertical walls were allowed to deflect. A new sensor to measure oscillations will also be introduced to stop any team from running their cars too low to the ground. F1 teams will be able to use this metric for the next round of the season in France to understand the effects on setup. Introducing a better sensor to measure oscillations is not a bad thing, but what matters is how the data captured is used. If F1 wants to continue with a metric that limits the vertical oscillations a driver is subject to, it makes sense to monitor it as accurately as possible. This could also be used for any medical studies into the effects on the drivers given the long-term concerns. After an apparent reduction in porpoising at recent events, the short-term fixes are seen as necessary due to circuits coming up on the calendar where the effects could worsen again. For now, drivers will need to stiffen their plank skids as a short-term fix for the Belgian Grand Prix. This begs the question, will there ever be a long-term solution to the porpoising problem? These short-term measures are not considered to be long-term solutions to the porpoising problem. However, this is predominantly due to the cars being expected to generate more downforce as the new era of technical regulations develop, leading to a worsening effect without further intervention. As such, several rule changes have been honed in on by the FIA for the 2023 season. This will include a 25mm raising of the floor edges, a raising of the underfloor diffuser throat, the introduction of more stringent lateral floor deflection tests, and a more accurate sensor to help quantify the aerodynamic oscillation. All of the aforementioned measures will be submitted to the World Motorsport Council for consideration and approval. The Mercedes team says it has got porpoising under control now, with team technical director Mike Elliott announcing that car updates will now flow steadily at each Grand Prix. We would like to be there in the fight that Ferrari and Red Bull are having in the front, confirmed team boss Wolff. Mercedes has made revisions to the angle of its rear track rod to also help with the porpoising issue. The slightly different design is aimed at better angling the track rod to the local flow direction, so it should help the car produce more downforce at a higher ride height. This could help Mercedes in its quest to get the car producing as much performance as possible without running so close to the ground that it suffers from bouncing. Speaking about the change, Hamilton said he was happy to continue experiments to help Mercedes learn more about its car, even though there was a risk of the trial failing and hurting his form. If it doesn't work, it's a lot slower because it has less downforce, but that's my role. I take that responsibility seriously, and whilst yes, it's not been ideal on some weekends, it's often set us back because we've lost a session or two. That's okay, because eventually we'll get there, and I'm proud to be part of that process, he said. Finally, to answer the lingering question, will the new FIA measures aid Mercedes? The answer is yes, but only if Mercedes can capitalize on the new measures. If you've been following our detailed explanation, your answer should be yes. Although, we would love to read it in the comments if you have a different answer to that. Thank you for watching. This brings us to the end of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click on the bell icon for notifications on exciting discussions like these and early F1 updates.